Hola, mi gente. Thank you for joining us on the Mano podcast. I'm George Laws Garcia, Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Statehood Council.
And I'm Martin Rivera, Director of Advocacy. On today's episode, we want to discuss the ongoing government funding fight and the potential shutdown.
Additionally, we want to update our listeners about the recent military buildup on the island in response to a potential conflict with Venezuela. We want to talk about President Trump's dismissal of members of Puerto Rico's Financial Oversight and Management Board and the economic impacts on the island for Bad Bunny's Residency.
So, let's get started.
All right, Martin, well, give us an update about what's going on in Congress.
So, as of today, September 23rd, we are 7 days away from a government shutdown. Again, when a government shutdown occurs, that means the federal agencies must stop all non-essential functions, non-essential employees are furloughed, and various services are disrupted until Congress acts. Just last week, the House passed a clean extension for government funding until November 21st. However, right after the vote, Speaker Johnson recessed the House until October 1st. The reason why that's a bit of an issue is because in the Senate, the Democrats blocked the House measure and introduced their own proposal to leave the government open until October 31st, but that was also blocked as well by Republicans. The main difference between the two bills, particularly the Democratic proposal, is that besides just having a clean CR and keeping the government running, it had Obamacare subsidy extensions. It rolled back massive Medicaid cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill. It also made the White House to forego any more rescission packages. And finally, it also restored hundreds of millions of dollars in public broadcast financing. However, so basically right now, given that both the proposals have been blocked, we are facing a government shutdown on September 30th at midnight.
But is there any possibility that they could come to an agreement? Is there any opportunity for the Trump administration to meet with members of Congress and try to hash this out?
So that's the interesting part. Since Speaker Johnson left for recess this week, the Senate also left for recess, so they're not here until next week, giving them only 2 days because the Senate comes back on September 29th, and more likely than not, they'll try to have another vote on the House-passed bill. The Democrats, on the other hand, they were scheduled to meet with President Trump this upcoming Thursday, but just earlier this morning, President Trump canceled that meeting. So again, hopefully negotiations continue and we don't go into a government shutdown, but it looks like a government shutdown is likely.
That is very, very sad. And for everyone to be aware, in Puerto Rico, there's about 14,000 federal employees that are on the island providing services to the U.S. citizens there. They run in a gamut of different federal agencies. So the government shutdown would definitely impact Puerto Rico as much as it would impact U.S. citizens in any other state. So with that, Martin, let's turn our attention to what's been happening in the Caribbean. Last week, there was a major situation that came up. U.S., which has been putting more and more pressure on the government of Venezuela, took some military action. What exactly did they do?
So on September 2nd, the U.S. military destroyed a boat coming off the coast of Venezuela. President Trump and the Trump administration said that he authorized the strike, claiming that the boat was carrying drugs operated by members of Tren de Aragua. That issue is still being discussed as to the legality of it, but then there was a second boat that was struck on September 15th, and that one, 3 individuals were killed. What it shows is still there's increasing tensions between Venezuela and the U.S. and Puerto Rico. Again, is the tip of the spear in the Caribbean for the U.S.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, one of the things that I've come to realize looking into the story is that earlier this year, President Trump signed an executive order declaring that all of the drug trafficking organizations were now being designated as terrorist organizations, and is basically indicating that that's what's justifying the capacity to take military action. Now, whether or not that actually pans out in the courts or in Congress, which is the only entity that's authorized under the Constitution to authorize a war, that's something else. But what is absolutely clear is that in the efforts by the Trump administration and the federal executive to put additional pressure on a clearly corrupt regime that is being run by the Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro. Puerto Rico has actually come out as being incredibly valuable because it is the closest U.S. territory to Venezuela. So in the efforts to put additional pressure on the Maduro regime, the U.S. Military has actually pre-positioned its assets, including various ships, drones, and fighter jets, and other surveillance aircrafts on its military installations on the island, as well as other former military stations, including Roosevelt Roads and the former Ramey Air Force Base.
Right. And besides the current conflict right now happening with Venezuela, and this is something that we've talked about in the past, how the strategic and national security importance of the island, being, again, at the center of the Caribbean, it's the gateway to the Caribbean. And we've talked about this issue aside of what's going on in Venezuela. Like, as you mentioned, we'll see what happens with the courts and also with Congress as to the legalities of the current actions. But that doesn't change the fact that, again, it shows that it demonstrates the importance of Puerto Rico, that, again, Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. Southern Command, which oversees military operations in the region. And this is just another example of us being the tip of the spear, being there ready to fight in another American conflict.
Yeah.
But we can't vote for a commander-in-chief. We don't have a vote in Congress. And we have no say if the country goes to war, but we're always there to fight for our country, even now.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because reactions on the island have obviously been varied, but the main leadership on the island, including Governor Jennifer Gonzalez, who met with Secretary Pete Hegseth when he visited the island, expressed her complete support for U.S. military troops operating on the island and an openness to supporting efforts to push back on narco-trafficking and all of the efforts that the U.S. military is doing to really gain control over the region so that the drug trafficking can really be pushed back on. In the Puerto Rico legislature, Senate President Tomás Rivera Chats led the passage of a resolution also expressing support for the Trump administration's actions to try to help stabilize the Caribbean by pushing back on the illegitimate Maduro regime. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting about this is on the public side on the island, there were a number of informal polls that asked individuals and voters there whether or not they supported the U.S. military presence or the reactivation of military bases.
So how were those polls?
So it's fascinating because you would not expect it, but anywhere between 70 and to almost 88, almost 90% of island residents who participate in those polls express support for the U.S. military and for the possible use and reactivation of military bases on the island.
So, because I've seen some of the complaints by the opposition to it, and to me, they try to convolute the usage of existing, like, for example, Roosevelt Roads has a runway, of those existing facilities, and they're trying to convolute it with Vieques, with the
former naval training range. Yeah,
of course. And that's something that I've noticed from Jennifer Gonzalez Colon to Tommy Rivera Chats, who's the Senate president, and even also from the resident commissioner, Pablo C. Hernandez, that everybody agrees that nobody's talking about opening up that range. It's to use existing military facilities to the maximum capacity that they can. And given the tensions, again, besides the ongoing tensions in Venezuela, that this is something that has been underutilized in the past by previous administrations.
Correct.
Both Democrat and Republican. So it's something that we've spoken about in the past about the national security importance of Puerto Rico, the gem of the Caribbean, in my point of view.
Yeah, and I think the most important point to make is that Puerto Rico inevitably represents a critical location for the United States to provide a stabilizing presence in the Caribbean. So we don't have nefarious actors, whether that's Nicolás Maduro or the Cuban communist regime or foreign influence from China or Russia to try to destabilize things. America's presence in Puerto Rico is really something that helps to make sure that everyone is on alert, that if they're up to some crazy shenanigans, America's going to be right there within striking distance at any time, and that the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico support it.
Right. So, George, speaking of the federal government's interest in Puerto Rico, there's been some issues recently, specifically in early August, in regards to the Financial Oversight Management Board. Could you speak a little bit about what's going on the island in regards to this
Sure. So we covered a little bit of this in the interview with Christina Ponce-Kraus in the last episode. But basically what has happened is that President Trump has essentially fired 5 of the 7 members of the Fiscal Oversight Board. And then more recently, he fired a 6th member of the Oversight Board. And that's really significant because the Oversight Board under the PROMESA law was established to be able to help Puerto Rico restructure its debts, essentially established balanced budgets and fiscal transparency, and then also help Puerto Rico regain economic growth.
So right now there's currently just one board member, John Nixon.
Yep.
So can you go a little bit into the process, into the nominations and the appointments by the president?
Sure. So the way that PROMESA works, the president appoints members to the board, but he does so one member he appoints unilaterally, and the other 6 get appointed based on recommendations provided by the majority leader in the House, the minority leader in the House, the majority leader in the Senate, and the minority leader in the Senate. And what that does is it provides a participation from both major political parties in the nominating process. Right now, we don't know when the new appointments will come out, but what we do know is that they will have a really significant impact in the policy direction that Puerto Rico will take, because ultimately the board is the only entity that can certify Puerto Rico's fiscal plan, as well as certify its budgets as being balanced.
On top of just one more thing, on top of the nominations and TBD to be determined who they are by the president, on September 18th there were 3 of the board members who actually filed a lawsuit in federal court alleging that their firings were illegal. Can you explain why they're trying to file these lawsuits?
Sure. So the 3 members that filed a lawsuit were Arthur Gonzalez, Andrew Biggs, and Betty Rosa. And what they're indicating is that under PROMESA, members can only be dismissed with cause, which means that there had to be a explained reason why they were fired. And what they're indicating is that there wasn't a sufficient explanation for why they were fired, and that there was no opportunity for them to provide, evidence to the contrary or have any kind of due process there. And, ultimately, we don't know what's going to happen with that lawsuit, but it could result in some of those members eventually being, returned to the board. But what if President Trump appoints some members to replace those seats in the meantime? It's a really kind of confusing situation. And the biggest challenge is that the board is really, really fundamental to Puerto Rico being able to stabilize its energy grid, because the board is the only entity that can help to finalize the debt restructuring for PREPA, Puerto Rico's Electric Power Authority, which without that restructuring, we can't actually get to the point where we rebuild Puerto Rico's energy grid and access the federal funds that have been available since PROMESA, which, by the way, recently was the 8th anniversary since the hurricane passed.
And you spoke about it earlier also, that the importance of the fiscal board's work right now, especially since the board itself in a recent congressional hearing announced that we have the first official balanced budget for the island. So hopefully things are resolved sooner than later so that we can continue resolving the debt restructuring, because I know, for like you mentioned, PREPA's debt, but already the fiscal board has restructured 80% of the island's debt.
Yeah, so
overall.
there's big progress that has been made. And earlier this year, Governor Jennifer Gonzalez announced in a joint press release with the Oversight Board that she got approved through the legislature the first certified balanced budget, which is a critical marker in the efforts to actually complete the process under PROMESA, so that the board can actually finish its functions and essentially allow the elected leaders in Puerto Rico to have, full authority to be able to, govern on behalf of the people. Because right now, these unelected board members, they can actually overturn local laws. And that means that the democratic deficit that Puerto Rico faces at the federal level is exacerbated by not even having full control over its local affairs.
Another reality of the territorial existence and status of Puerto Rico currently right now.
Yeah, it's terrible. But in good news, there is a really unexpected factor that is improving the possibility that Puerto Rico will have a balanced budget during this fiscal year. And it's the fact that the artist residency by Bad Bunny has generated a very significant increase in tax revenue on the island that was otherwise unexpected. I heard that the residency just wrapped up recently. Tell us about it. How did that go? What does it matter to our issue?
So Bad Bunny's residency, titled No Me Quiero Ir de Aquí, featured 30 concerts between July and September, which broke attendance records with nearly 600,000 spectators, and it left the island an estimated economic impact of $713 million. Wow. And you received attendees from, for example, 55% of attendees were from Puerto Rico, 39% were from the United States, 6% were from other countries such as Dominican Republic, Colombia, Spain, and Mexico. At the end of the day, it just shows one thing. It demonstrates how Puerto Rico could be a
cultural capital,
tourism cultural capital, and it was a very interesting show. They had originally 30 shows, but they also held the 31st show, which they streamed live, and that show actually in Amazon Prime broke viewing records for in Amazon Music for concerts with, I believe, was 1.2 million viewers.
Wow, and that's really impressive. One of the things that I think is critical for everyone to be aware of is that we can completely applaud all of the economic impact and exposure that Bad Bunny is having to help Puerto Rico be recognized on the global stage. And obviously the additional money coming into Puerto Rico based on his residency is a fantastic development. However, there were a number of instances throughout the show and some, additional comments that Bad Bunny made to national press that really go against what the majority of people on the island believe. What was that?
He did put a line in the sand as to where he stands on the issue of status. I'm going to paraphrase the quote here. I've met a lot of gringos who have come to me talking about Puerto Rico becoming a state like it's something cool. And I tell them, nah, bro, it's not like that. That's not cool at all. Again, like you mentioned, he's entitled to his opinion. Where we agree, again, is that we all believe that we shouldn't stay as a territory. We shouldn't stay under the colonial territorial status that we're subjected to right now. He has a difference of opinion. He obviously believes more towards independence. But again, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but that is not the majority of opinion from the island's voters and the island's U.S. citizens who, every time they've gone to the ballot in the last 4 plebiscites this century, they've all voted to rejecting the current status, where we all agree, and this is where we disagree. The majority has continuously supported statehood as their preferred future status.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that is absolutely important to highlight. Bad Bunny clearly right now is one of the, if not the most popular artist in the world, right? And the fact that he's promoting Puerto Rico and highlighting Puerto Rican culture is great. But no matter how big his megaphone is, it can never and should never drown out the legitimate expression by the majority of voters about what they want for their future. And it's absolutely essential that Congress and the American public recognize what voters on the island have said and not just pay attention to what a single artist is promoting.
Right. Again, listen to the people to resolve this issue through the ballot box.
Yeah.
That's what we believe in.
All right, Martin, and we know that Bad Bunny's concerts will continue, so that
Yes.
story will continue to unfold.
That's the world tour, and that's a story for another day. And we'll see. As you mentioned, he's one of the biggest artists. There's already buzz about Grammy nomination. So again, the issue of Bad Bunny and his showing our culture to the world is going to continue. And also, it highlights the issue of status. And what we're here for is just to continue showing that, yes, we must change, but we need to let the people choose their future through the ballot box.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us for this episode. We greatly appreciate your attention and time. If you like our content, please give us a like, send us your comments, share this on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Simplecast. We're on all of those platforms. Please make sure to hit subscribe and share with your family and friends. Thank you so much, and have a great day.